right, it is 10:01, so I think we are going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Megan Erickson, a nutrition field specialist with SDSU Extension, and we are so excited to have you join us for the Food Preservation at Home series. This is the 8th session, I can't believe it, of our series, which runs through September 22nd, and that is going to be our final session. So September 22nd, and we're going to be talking about canning meats. We've covered a variety of different food preservation methods throughout the last 8 weeks, and today Hope Kleine is going to be talking about dehydrating. And so we received some questions that were submitted with registrations to be addressed during the live session. But if any of you have any questions, please feel free to type in the chat box and we'll answer those throughout today's session. So, all right, we're gonna get started. But before I introduce, sorry about that. Before I introduce Hope, I would like you to type your location, whether you have eaten dehydrated food, and if so, what are some of your favorites? And I would have to say, gosh, I love dehydrated food, but I love apples and then jerky. So those are two of my favorites. So I'm gonna pull up the chat. So yeah, pull up your chat, and if you could type your location, whether you've eaten dehydrated food, and if so, what are some of your favorites? And as you're doing that, I am going to launch a poll. We have some questions for you that we're going to do before and after. So first one, hopefully everybody is able to see that, your knowledge on current practices for today's home food preservation topic. So today we are talking on dehydration. Give it a couple seconds. All right, looks like a few of us are a little confident, I feel, and hopefully by the end of this that your confidence will increase. All right, second one is your ability to follow safe practices for today's home food preservation topic. So ability to follow safe practices when it comes to dehydrating. All right, give it a couple more seconds. All right. Good. All right, and one last one. Maybe. Okay, knowing where to go for safe, research-tested recipes for preserving food using today's home food preservation topic. All right, awesome. So we got some, again, all across the board. Wonderful, thank you. All right, so I would like to introduce Hope Kleine. She is our health education and food safety field specialist based in Brookings. Hope serves Salticotans by helping individuals and communities implement healthy living interventions. As a certified exercise physiologist, her programming focuses on exercise, healthy communities, and her knowledge on food preservation. Hope grew up canning with her father her entire life and has followed in his footsteps with growing her own garden and preserving her own food, from peaches to green beans to deer. Her favorite food to dehydrate is peaches and onions. That's a new favorite because she hates to chop onions. This way she gets it all done at once and has them all ready to go. So with that, Hope, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, I just started trying dehydrating onions, and it's probably my new favorite because my eyes are very sensitive to onions, so I'm like a crying mess whenever I chop onions. So this way I can get it all done in one shot and be done with it. Okay, so drying foods. It's one of the oldest methods of preserving food for later use. Drying removes the moisture from the food so that bacteria, yeasts, and molds can't grow and spoil the food. Drying also slows down the action of enzymes, which are naturally occurring substances, which cause foods to ripen, but it doesn't inactivate them. So that is why there is a shelf life with dried foods. Increasing the temperature of the food, so the drying process makes the moisture from the food evaporate, and the air moving over the food carries the moisture away. So you need a balance of temperature and humidity in order to successfully dry your foods. So when your food has very little to no water content, that equals the slowed growth of microorganisms. And then your balance of temperature and humidity, like I stated, is kind of part of your equation for successful drying. So moving on to discuss foods that can be dried. There's fruits, meats, vegetables, and herbs. Looking at the chat box from what all of you shared that you like to enjoy or dry yourself, it looks like there's a variety of all of these food categories, which is really great. So we're gonna dive right in with talking about how do you prepare your foods for drying. So first off, no matter what it is that you're drying, you want to select items that are ripe and in their best quality state, because the better quality you have of your food product before you start drying it, the better quality you're gonna have as an end result. And then you want to remove any stems or if you have cores or pits, and then cut away any bruising and slice the produce or other food item as easily, as evenly as possible. And the more even that you're able to slice your produce or your meat, that's going to result in an overall better drying experience because they'll all dry at the same rate. And then complete any pre-treatments that may be necessary. These pre-treatments can help retain color during the drying and storage process. So we're going to start first talking about how to pre-treat your fruit. So there are a number of different ways that you can pre-treat your fruit before drying it, and this can help prevent it from darkening. So there is a sulfur burn, I think is what it's called, but I chose not to cover that today because it's not commonly used, and there are a number of precautions when using that method. So we're going to be talking about instead, we're going to instead be talking about a sulfite dip, which is really similar to that sulfur burn. So going on to the next slide, it's going to discuss the sulfite dip further. So you need a food grade sodium bisulfate or sodium sulfite or sodium metabisulfate. And you can get these products at any place that has some of your other food preservation equipment. It's relatively easy to find online as well. Just make sure that it is of food grade quality. And then you dissolve the recommended amount in water. So just depending on which of those options you get, your quantity is going to vary. So just read the directions for the solution that you get. And then you're going to soak your fruit in water for 5 minutes if you're doing like something like sliced peaches, or 15 minutes if you're doing something like halved apricots. And then after that time period has came to an end, you want to rinse the fruit lightly under water, and noting that this solution can only be used once. So if you have a bowl full of apricots that you've had soaked and then you're ready to pull those apricots out, you need to discard of that solution. You can't use it for another round of apricots. Moving on to talking about ascorbic acid, this is a solution that can be used twice, so that's a little less wasteful. But you want to use 1 teaspoon of powdered ascorbic acid in 2 cups of water, and then you would place the fruit in the solution for 3 to 5 minutes. You remove it, you drain it well, and like I noted, this solution can be used twice. Next, there is a fruit juice dip. This is where you cover the produce with fruit juice and you soak it for 3 to 5 minutes. So for this, you want a fruit juice that is specifically high in vitamin C. And it's not as effective as using the ascorbic acid method that I just talked about, but the juices that are high in vitamin C that you can use for this method would include orange juice, lemon juice, pineapple, grape, or cranberry juice. Each juice adds its own color and flavor to the fruit. So if you're kind of looking to switch it up or to maybe blend two different flavors together, this could be a fun option for you to do. All right, moving on to the honey dip. This is where many of the store-bought and dried fruits that you purchase, this is what they use. So they use the honey dip solution. And we can do a similar method at home. Just know that any fruit that you do this honey dip for is going to be higher in calories. So for this, you mix a 1/2 cup of sugar with 1.5 cups of boiling water. Then you want to make sure it dissolves, then cool it to be lukewarm, and then add about a 1/2 cup of honey. And then you cover and soak your fruit for 3 to 5 minutes. And then you remove it and you drain it well, but you don't rinse it off. All right, 2 more methods. There's syrup blanching. So next it's going to be talking about syrup blanching and steam blanching. And blanching fruit in syrup helps it retain its color fairly well during the drying and storage process. And the resulting product is really similar to candied fruits. So there's certain fruits that can be syrup blanched, and those include your apples, apricots, figs, nectarines, peaches, pears, plums, and prunes. So to do the syrup blanching, you boil 1 cup of sugar with 1 cup of light corn syrup and 2 cups water. And then you're able to add up to 1 pound of fruit and then let that simmer for 10 minutes. Then you want to let it cool for 30 minutes and then rinse it lightly and drain. All right, and then steam blanching, the last method. This is boiling several inches of water in a large pot and then placing fruit no more than 2 inches deep in a wire basket and then covering that lightly and then blanching according to the produce that you're drying. So when we're talking about having fruit no more than 2 inches deep in a wire basket, we're talking about not filling your wire basket too full of fruit. And this will go for vegetables when we talk about steam blanching in a little bit. For vegetables, you want your fruit to be able to breathe and have access to that steam. So you don't want to pile on your produce in that wire basket because it's not going to result in the best quality, as not all of the produce in the center of your pile will be blanched accordingly. Okay, so moving on to talking about your pre-treatment for vegetables. So blanching is a necessary step in most of your vegetables for drying. So you can either water blanch your vegetables or you can steam blanch your vegetables. So blanching is the process of heating vegetables to a temperature that's high enough to destroy enzymes that are present in the tissues within your vegetable products. Blanching stops the enzyme action, which can cause loss of color and flavor during drying and storage. It also shortens the drying and rehydration time by relaxing the tissue walls so that moisture can escape and then later re-enter more rapidly. So while it may seem like an extra step initially when you are getting prepared to dehydrate your foods, it's actually going to save you time for the time that your vegetables spend in your dehydration process, as well as if you're rehydrating them for later use. So talking specifically about water blanching, this is really similar. You're going to boil a large pot 2/3 full with water, and then you're going to submerge your vegetables in this boiling water. Using, again, a wire basket is going to be really handy. And then you want to cover and blanch according to directions. So this is going to vary based off of what kind of vegetable product it is that you are blanching. And just to note that if you get your water to boil on your stove and then you add your vegetables and it takes longer than 1 minute for the water to return to a boil, you've added too many vegetables. So that's something that you really want to keep eye on, because if you add too many vegetables and it takes longer than a minute for your water to boil, you're actually heating those vegetables longer in that water blanching process than you are wanting to do. And then next, talking about steam blanching for vegetables. Really similar to what I talked about with the fruit products, using the deep pot with a tight-fitting lid and wire basket, bringing the water to a boil, and then placing the basket full of vegetables, but no more than 2 inches deep, and then cover and then steam for the appropriate amount of time based off of what vegetable you are steam blanching. And then no matter if you do water blanching or steam blanching, you want to dip the vegetables briefly in cold water until the vegetables are slightly hot to the touch, and then you drain and dry. So the reason that you want to leave those vegetables slightly hot to the touch is because the heat left in the vegetables from blanching will cause the drying process to move forward more quickly. So watch the vegetables closely at the end of the drying period, because when you blanch your vegetables before dehydrating them, they dry quicker. So if previously you have dehydrated a vegetable without blanching it, you're going to reduce your dehydrating time once you bring in that blanching process. Okay, so we've talked about preparing your produce prior to drying it. So now we're moving on to the process of getting it dried. So there's 3 methods of drying food. There is microwave drying. It is very quick. Because of its quickness, though, it does cause food to taste overcooked. So that's not something that we're going to be covering in depth today. We're more going to be talking about oven drying and then using a dehydrator, as they result in a better, higher quality product. So with oven drying, it does take several hours beyond what it does take a dehydrator to dry the product that you are working on. But you want to dry the slices adequately, and when you're using the oven to dry your products, it makes your oven unavailable for other uses. So you're looking at probably a minimum of a half day of having different items in your oven for drying. So just take that into account as you're preparing other meals for yourself or your family. And you also have to leave the oven door open slightly for promoting airflow. So if you have young children in the home, this might not be the best method of dehydrating food. And it's also not as efficient as a dehydrator, as it uses more energy. And then when you're looking at dehydrators, this is a very common method of drying foods. It does produce the best quality of food, and it dries the food more evenly and retains more of the nutrients and food quality. So these are a really good choice because they can be used at any time. They're not restricting you from preparing other food in your house. And it is a relatively small appliance. And they have an electric fan built into them that promotes the air circulation. So this really helps them working effectively and drying foods more evenly. So if you choose to dry in the oven, we're going to talk about the specific steps for using the oven to dry. So here you can see an image of onions being dried in the oven. So what you want to do is you want to arrange the prepared produce evenly on trays in a single layer. So you can use like cake pan trays, or if you have like those racks that you can use. I'm thinking of, I have one specific for like from Pampered Chef. So you can use those racks so there can be airflow underneath your produce as well. And then just set that on a cake pan so that you have something underneath to catch as your items are going to shrink as they're being dried, and they could fall through that rack. Then you want to leave the oven door open just about 2 to 6 inches. And then if you would like, you can set a fan outside of the oven door, but pointed at the oven door, and this can help promote air circulation. Then you want to make sure that you're monitoring the temperature of your oven. So you want to place a thermometer near where your food is at in your oven. And your tray should be at least 3 inches apart for air circulation. So you want to make sure to not overcrowd your oven. And then you want to check for desired dryness just based on the time that it takes your item to dry, which we'll talk about more in depth in just a little bit. And then once your food is dehydrated, you want to store food in an airtight container to keep the moisture out. So while using your oven to dry foods might be nice because you likely already have an oven in your home, there are a few things that you want to take into consideration before you use this method. And the first is to check on your oven and see if it can register a temperature as low as 140 degrees. And if your oven doesn't go this low, you're not going to want to utilize it to dry your foods, as it's going to result in your food cooking rather than drying. So an option if you don't think your oven registers 140 degrees is that you can put your oven on the warm setting. So a lot of ovens now have that warm setting, and you can put an oven thermometer inside your oven and then see about what temperature is the warm setting on your oven. And that might work best. That might work well for being able to dehydrate foods using your oven. Okay, and then moving on to using a dehydrator. So some of the steps are really similar, arranging the produce evenly in dehydrator trays in a single layer. So you're not wanting to overlap them too heavily. And then drying times, like I said, will vary. So we're going to look at that. For onions, it is between, I think it's 6 to 9 hours is what it is for onions. So you want to make sure that you're monitoring and checking for that desired dryness. And then once the food is dehydrated, again, store in an airtight container to be able to keep that moisture out. Okay, so I've been saying to monitor for dryness, but how do we know when it's dry to the level that we need it to be? So here are some tips. For fruits, you want no visible moisture. You want to grab a piece of fruit and squeeze it and see if you can squeeze any moisture from the fruit. And then some fruits may remain pliable, but they shouldn't be sticky or tacky. So I specifically think about peaches. You know, they're not, a dried peach isn't stiff, it's still pliable and it's still bendy, but it's not sticky. So if you feel any stickiness remaining to your peach, it's not completely done drying. So you want to put it back in your dehydrator. And if you have a piece of fruit, you should be able to fold it in half and maybe just squeeze it a little bit and then let go. And it should not stick to itself. So that would be another sign that it is a little bit sticky or tacky and isn't done drying yet. And then for your vegetables, they should be brittle or crisp, just depending upon what it is that you are drying, what kind of vegetable you're drying. And since dried foods are generally eaten without being rehydrated, so fruits specifically, they should not be dehydrated to the point of brittleness like a vegetable is. Most fruits should have about 20% moisture content when they're dried, whereas your dried vegetables have about a 10% moisture content level. All right, so packing and storing. After you have achieved the desired dryness for your product, you want to allow it to cool for 30 to 60 minutes before packing it up in an airtight container. If you were to package your food warm, it can lead to the product sweating and moisture buildup inside of your jar or other airtight container. And when fruit is taken from the dehydrator oven, the remaining moisture may not be distributed equally among the pieces. So remember I said that fruit has about 20% moisture content after drying and vegetables are at about a 10. So your fruit's at a higher moisture content, but they might not have been dried evenly. So what you actually need to do with your fruit is you need to condition it before you have it for long-term storage. So I have those steps on this slide, but it's simply packing the dried fruit loosely in plastic or glass jars. So I use a mason jar personally because I have a lot of them and it's easy. So you would like put your peaches in your jar, you would tighten that lid up, and then I would recommend leaving it somewhere where you're not going to forget about it. So generally I would put my dried products down in my basement pantry, but I don't want to forget about being able to condition my fruit. So I might leave it in a cupboard where I'll see it on a daily basis. So what you want to do is shake the jar daily so that you're separating those pieces so they're not sticking together. And then check your airtight container for any condensation. So if you have any condensation there, it means that there's more moisture than that 20% content that we're wanting to be at. So you actually want to return them to the dehydrator to dry them out a little bit further. After that 7 to 10 day window, if you've been shaking them and they've been staying separate and you're not seeing condensation in your airtight container, then they are fine and you've achieved the correct dryness level. So then you can put them down in your pantry for long-term storage. And something else with the conditioning the fruit, not only does that allow you to monitor and make sure that you've safely reached the correct point of dryness so that your foods don't mold or waste as they're sitting in your pantry, but it allows that the moisture content in your fruit product to distribute evenly among all of the produce that is in your jar. So like I said, if your have a couple peach slices that are a little bit thicker, they're going to have a higher moisture content than some of those thinner slices. So they'll naturally, in that airtight container, distribute moisture evenly among all of the product. Okay, so now you have your dried produce. What are you going to do with it? So dried fruits can be eaten as is, or they can be reconstituted. So I know a lot of people use their dried fruits just for a healthy snack, which is great. But your dried vegetables should be reconstituted. So basically rehydrated is what we're talking about here. So for your soups and stews, you can add the dehydrated vegetables without going through a rehydration process, because they'll get rehydrated as they sit in that soup or stew to add additional flavor. But to reconstitute other vegetables for other use, you want to add water to the produce and soak it until the desired volume is restored. So if soaking takes more than 2 hours for a specific produce item for food safety reasons, it is recommended to place it in the refrigerator for the remainder of the rehydrating process. But you do want to closely monitor it, because over soaking produces loss in flavor and a mushy, waterlogged texture. So you can see this table that is presented on this slide, and this comes from the National Center for Home Food Preservation. And I do have the URL present on this slide, so you can take note of that. But this has the recommended reconstituting time for your fruits and your vegetables, so that you can see how much water do I need to add to my 1 cup of dried product, and then what is my minimum soaking time, so that it can be used, you know, for a recipe other than your soups or your stews. Okay, so we've really covered a lot on drying your fruits and your vegetables. So now we're going to dive into a little bit on your meat. So drying your meat. Jerky is the most common dried meat product. It is lightweight and delicious and a great snack. Raw poultry is not recommended for making jerky, because the texture and flavor of the finished product is not pleasant. So there are different resources on being able to dry beef, pork, venison, and smoked turkey breast. So again, not raw poultry, but smoked turkey breast. Your meat thickness, you really want to stick to that 1/4 inch or less. Any thicker than this can result in food safety risk, according to the steps that you see on this slide. So basically what that's saying is you are preparing your food, your meat, to be dried, but if it's thicker, it's going to take longer to dehydrate, and having your food at the temperature that it needs to be for dehydrating, if it's too thick and it's not being dried fast enough, it can be a food safety risk. So after you slice your meat no more than a 1/4 inch thick, you want to trim and discard all of the fat, because the fat can become rancid very quickly and it doesn't store well with the drying process. And with meat, it's recommended to heat it prior to drying, as it decreases the chance of foodborne illness. So what you do is you would bring your strips, and then if you chose to marinate your jerky, you can boil it in the marinade for 5 minutes. If you don't choose to marinate it, that's fine. You can just boil it in water for 5 minutes. And then you want to monitor, so check a couple of strips to make sure they've achieved 160-degree internal temperature. And then once that has been achieved, you want to drain and dry the meat. So a couple of notes that we have on the next slide. Before moving your a little bit heated meat, before moving it to the dehydrator, there are some steps of caution that you want to take. So your raw meats can be contaminated with microorganisms that cause disease. And specifically talking about pork or any other wild game, like if you're making venison jerky, they should be treated to kill, I'm not probably going to say this right, but I will do my best, but trichinella parasite. So in order to treat your pork or venison, you want to freeze a 6-inch block or smaller portion for at least 30 days, as those harmful bacteria in the parasite can cause sickness. So you want to make sure to freeze it to kill off anything harmful that might be in it. And then also thinking about, you know, if you or a loved one went out and shot the venison, just making sure that they're following the correct dressing and gutting the deer out in the field, following the proper protocols so that that meat is not contaminated. Okay, so you've sliced your meat, you've maybe marinated it, and then you've boiled it, and it's reached 160-degree internal temperature. What you want to do next, and this slide is relating specifically to a dehydrator, but it's going to be pretty similar for the oven, but you would arrange the meat strips evenly on trays or maybe pans if you're doing it in the oven in a single layer. And then you would place the meat in the dehydrator oven once it's preheated to 140 degrees. So that's something that's different compared to the vegetables and fruits, which you can just line up on your trays and turn on the oven or turn on the dehydrator. With your meat, you don't want to lose some of that heat that you've established from boiling it. So you want to make sure that your dehydrator oven is preheated. And then your drying time will vary from 10 to 24 hours, just depending on, are you using a dehydrator? Are you using an oven? And then what kind of jerky are you making and how thick are your strips? You want to start checking at about 6 hours is where they recommend. And you would check by bending a sample. And when it cracks but doesn't break, this is the appropriate dryness level that you're wanting to achieve. Then you would pat off any beads of oil with a paper towel and then let the jerky cool before you store it. And then once it is cooled off, you store it in an airtight container to keep the moisture out. And something else you can do is you can put it in an airtight container or you can vacuum seal it, and then you can place it in the freezer for later. And a note here that meats marinated prior to drying are going to dry faster than meat that is not heated in a marinade. So if you're marinating your strips to add a little extra flavor, make sure to be monitoring a little bit more closely as it will dry out a little bit quicker. And then last on meats, I have some tips. So if you're going to try to do some jerky, having your meat partially frozen will make it easier to slice in that really thin 1/4 inch thickness that we're wanting to achieve. And then meat can be marinated for added flavor and tenderness. For a chewy jerky, slice with the grain. And then for a tender, more brittle jerky, slice across the grain. For ground meat, if you're gonna grind your meat and season it, and then they have a special tool, which I can't think of what it's called, but it's basically like a pump, or if you are familiar with like a caulk gun, where it'll push the meat out in thin strips so that it will form a thin jerky. So you follow the dehydrator manufacturer's instructions for how to dry out your ground meat in a safe manner. The internal temperature of 160 degrees is necessary, so I just like to really emphasize that for food safety. And then properly dried jerky will keep at room temperature for 2 weeks in a sealed container. So if it's going to be eaten up quickly, it is safe to leave out on your countertop for up to 2 weeks. And then to increase shelf life, maintain best flavor and quality, you can refrigerate, or like I mentioned before, freeze the jerky for later consumption. All right, for maximum results with any method of drying, the best temperature to dry and preserve food items is 140 degrees. As I mentioned, if you go above that 140 degree mark, your food is going to result in being cooked rather than dried. Before beginning the drying process, it is recommended that with meat, again, it's heated to at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and poultry is heated to 165. Once they're heated to those temperatures, the dehydrator can be left at 130 to 140 degrees. So that last bullet is specific to meat. For all your other produce, you want to be at about that 140 degree mark. But with meat, you reach that 160 degree internal temperature when you are kind of pre-cooking it. But then in the dehydrator, you do want that 140 degrees. All right, so covering a couple of problems that might arise. As I mentioned, if the temperature is higher than 130 to 140 degrees, it's going to result in your food getting cooked rather than dried. And then something that we experience often in South Dakota is the high humidity. So the drying process is going to take longer than what your recipe states if the humidity is high where you are at. And low humidity is helpful since the drying process involves pulling the moisture out of the food and it expels it into the air. So I know something that some individuals do is maybe they're drying items in a specific room in their house and they keep the door shut, but they also put their dehumidifier in that room. So while the moisture is being pulled out of the food and into the air, the dehumidifier is pulling the moisture out of the air and into the dehumidifier. So that is a way that you could speed up the drying process. All right, we're going to talk briefly about fruit leathers. So fruit leathers are a tasty, chewy, dried fruit product, and it's made by pouring pureed fruit onto a flat surface for drying. So some of your dehydrators might come with, it's not a tray, but it's in the shape of a tray that fits inside the drying trays. And it's just a little plastic smooth insert, and that would be something that you can use for your fruit leathers. So you would prepare your fruit just like you always would, washing it, peeling it, removing seeds, cut it into chunks, and then puree it until it's smooth. You want to add 2 teaspoons of lemon juice and an 1/8 teaspoon of ascorbic acid for every 2 cups of light colored fruit. So that's going to help retain its nice color. And then you want to spread it evenly to about an 1/8-inch thick. So you're not making very thick fruit leather. And then again, you dry at 140 degrees until there's no indentation left when you touch the center. So just think of like, you know, when you touch Jello to see if the Jello is hardened and cooled enough. You don't want to see an indent left. So typically in the dehydrator, you're looking at a 6 to 8 hour time frame, and in the oven, you're looking at that 12 to 18 hours. Then you, just like your other items, you want to let them cool and then wrap it in plastic. Okay, so next, maybe after hearing this presentation, you're really thinking, oh, I need to buy a dehydrator so I can try to dehydrate some of these food items. So some things to consider when looking at dehydrators is that you want to look for a UL seal of approval, and this just states that the dehydrator is nationally recognized as safe and meets sustainable standards. Some other items that are really convenient with dehydrators is some of them come with a timer. So as you saw throughout this presentation, the drying time can be pretty lengthy. So depending on your schedule, it might be in the middle of the night that the drying might be done. You might be at work. So having your dehydrator turn off by itself is really beneficial. Of course, it's best to be able to monitor throughout the drying process as much as possible. There are sturdy, lightweight plastic mesh trays that come with your dehydrator. So in this picture, you're able to see a couple of them. Dehydrators typically come with 4 to 10 trays. And then dehydrators, you would like to get one that has a dial so you can regulate the temperature. So I know the one that I have, it has like, oh, I'm drying herbs, I'm drying fruit, I'm drying vegetables, and it has different temperatures that I'm able to choose, which is really nice. All right, and then storing dried foods, we've already mentioned having them in a airtight container, moisture-proof container. Keep the products once you have them completely dried in a cool, dry, and dark location. And then your recommended storage times, because remember, there's still microorganisms that are in your food. It's just a slowed process with the moisture being pulled out. For dried fruits, they are good for up to 1 year, and your dried vegetables are at a half of a year. So make sure that you label and date your items. And then some safety considerations. Make sure you're washing all of your produce in cold running water. Remove any dirt or insect larvae. And then you want to blanch your produce when your recipe calls for that, as this facilitates the reduction or elimination of pathogens that can be found in the raw produce. And as I mentioned, it saves you time in the long run as they dehydrate faster. And then next, talking about cleaning your dehydrator, cleaning the base with a damp cloth and just wiping it dry, and then washing the trays and lid of your dehydrator after each use. Some of the trays may be dishwasher safe, so just look at your instruction manual because that can make it quite easy. In this picture, you see fruit layered all together in the dehydrator on the left. And that's fine to do. Just know that you might have some of the flavors cross over into one another. With fruit, that's not common, or that's not often a problem. It's more so with vegetables. So if you're drying onions, you might not want to dry onions and a sweet potato if you don't want those flavors to cross with one another. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of resources that we have on our extension website in relation to drying. And I know Megan is going to be sharing these if she hasn't already in the chat box, a direct link. So we have a preserve it material. So we have a program called Pick It, Try It, Like It, Preserve It. So there is preserve it fact sheets that we have up on the website for a large variety of produce items. So here I'm just highlighting a couple of them, but you can see the circled red area is the area that specifically tells you how to dry. So these preserve it fact sheets have how to either water bath or pressure can items, as well as how to freeze and how to dry them. And all of our information came from reliable websites such as the National Center for National Center for Home Food Preservation. So they're all evidence-based, reliable resources, which is something that you always want to do when you are looking up food preservation recipes, just to ensure that you are doing the correct safe measures to keep your food safe for consumption. And then on the next slide on our website, we also have a guide to drying foods. So this is a 2-page publication that just walks you through the steps of how to dry your foods. So this can be really beneficial if you're maybe new to drying or dehydrating, to just make sure that you're hitting all of the key points that you need to take into consideration. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, that's the website I just mentioned, the National Center for Home Food Preservation. So if you go to their website, you can see on the left-hand side, it says, how do I, and they have canning area, freezing, drying, all of that good stuff. So this screenshot is specifically showing you, if you click on dry, these are all of the different resources. And this is where a lot of the information from today came from. So it's a really, really great resource. So that's what I have prepared in a presentation, but we have an extra little video that we would like to show everybody. So we have a collaboration with an individual that is really well versed in traditional drying methods. So I'm going to actually screen share here in just a minute. And this is about a 5 or 6 minute video. I'm only going to show a couple different portions of it. So let me get ready. And I think I need to. One second. Okay.
Albeduarte, Shahui Imachiapi. Medina Matonis is my English name. I am an enrolled member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. I have been asked by Hope and Megan to share some of what I have been taught about food preservation as it relates to my Lakota heritage and culture, specifically to drying foods. Disclaimer, I am not an expert. I can only share with you what I have been taught. Dry our food without. Wild foods that get harvested are still sun-dried to this day, for example. Team Sila, the prairie turnip. Prairie turnip is dug up in the early summer. The outer skin is stripped off, peeled off, and you're left with the turnip, and it has a long tail, I would call the tail. And they're braided together and they're dried. Sometimes they're dried in the house, or sometimes they're hung outside during really warm days. They'll dry quicker. Champa, the choke cherry. I have a small sample here. These are wild choke cherries. And I don't know if you can see these. But they are small little round cherries. And these are picked in the late summer, and traditionally they're pounded or ground into a paste so that the seed inside is crushed. That's where some of our medicine comes from, is the seed inside. So they're pounded and the seed is pulverized and it makes a paste, and that paste is taken and put into little patties this big, and like one of my fondest memories growing up was pounding choke cherries with my grandfather. My mother had a pounding stone, which was a stone with a flat surface, and another stone that was shaped to similar to a hand, and how it would be like a handle. And those cherries were placed onto that stone and pounded. And so you had choke cherry juice running off the sides. My grandpa would let us, my sister and I, take the cherries that he pounded, and we would make little patties. And we had dishcloths out, those big, huge white dishcloths, flour dishcloths. And we would lay those patties out on the dishcloth in the sun, and the sun would dry them, and those were used for winter food stores. Herbs and medicines is the next one. So, harvested and sun-dried, depending on the plant. For example, here I have a burdock leaf that I collected, which is fairly huge. And sage. This is a sage bundle. Depending on the plant, is the drying method. Sage can also be dried the same way that the burdock is dried, because these leaves are so huge. I lay it out and let it dry in the sun. I find that the best place to dry my medicines or my herbs is in my car, in the front dash, because the sun is always beating down, so it's really hard, and it dries it fairly quick. And then I just flip it over and let the other side dry until it's nice and crispy. And then I break it up and I store it in Ziploc baggies or canning jars. And with the sage, you can either lay it out outside and let it dry, and then once it's dry, bundle it up, or you can bundle it together and let it hang in your house. And another example I have is bergamot or bee balm. I did the same way as the sage bundle. I gathered them up, hung them upside down, and let them dry in my house. Actually, no, I laid it out in the sun first all day after we harvested, and I flipped it midday, and it was pretty dry. That evening, before humidity starts to set in, I brought it back into the house and hung it over my mudroom door entry. And I took apart the stems with the leaves and the heads, the seed heads, and I let them dry separately because the seed heads were thicker and it took a little longer to dry.
Okay, so we just wanted to be able to provide a little bit on traditional drying methods. So we thank Medina for making that video for us. Aside from that video, that is everything we had today for covering drying and dehydrating. So if there's any questions, go ahead and feel free to unmute yourself or type them into the chat box. I did see the chat about the tip for drying or for when you're chopping onions of shoving your mouth full of bread. I am going to have to try that. I am really intrigued by that. All right, I'm not seeing any questions coming yet, and maybe we have some people that are still typing, but I know we do have a post polling that we want to do just to see how your knowledge has changed based off of what was presented today. So I'll have Megan go ahead and launch that. But of course, if you have questions, you still have a few minutes to go ahead and get those in the chat box, and I'll make sure to answer them.
All right, everybody, your knowledge on today's topic of current practices for dehydrating. So give you a few seconds to do this poll. I am loving what I see because I can already tell you guys learned something, so that's wonderful. Okay, couple. Okay. So you can see there, we were kind of across the board before, so we've kind of shifted towards the other side, so it's awesome. Okay, our second question. Your ability to follow safe practices for dehydrating. So please rate your confidence level. And once again, you guys are killing it with your confidence. So this is awesome to see. I'm gonna share results. All right, wonderful. And one last question. Thank you for bearing with us. All right, knowing where to go for safe research-tested recipes for preserving food, so using the dehydration method that was discussed by Hope today. All right. Awesome. Wonderful. Well, from the looks of it, everybody learned something new. This has been great. So that concludes our program for today. If you have any additional questions, you can contact Hope or myself. Oh, we do have one question. I've never dehydrated food and not sure I want to try it. What do you Hope find is the best reason? What's the best reason to dehydrate?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, like Megan shared in my introduction, I've been canning for the whole life. And drying is relatively new to me, actually, as well. I've really only started diving into it the past couple of years. So the first thing that I tried dehydrating was peaches. And the reason I did that is because I had bought a few lugs of peaches to be able to can them, because canned peaches are the best. And I had enough left over, or I had some peaches left over that weren't enough to feel like it was worth doing a third round of water bath canning. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to keep some for my family to eat fresh, but they were ripe enough that we wouldn't have ate them all quick enough. So I actually had about 18 of them that I decided I was going to experiment with dehydrating. So that was one reason why I did it, just knowing that my family wasn't going to eat them fast enough, and I didn't want to freeze them just because I don't really like frozen fruit very much. And then onions are kind of my newer item that I've been trying, and it's really just because my garden produced onions like crazy this year. And I know they can stay good for quite a long time, but honestly, it was just being able to chop them all at once and being done with chopping up onions. So I guess for me, those are the reasons that I've decided to dehydrate. There is a convenience factor to it, especially thinking about being able to just, grab a handful or a half a handful of dehydrated onions and throwing them in my chili later this fall. It just sounds really convenient to me.
My kids also love like dehydrated apples, and it's a super easy, healthy snack that's easy to grab and go. So there is a convenience factor, and it's just another way to preserve our food and make it last longer. So whether you're into canning or freezing, dehydrating is just another great method to use. Awesome question. Any last minute ones? Okay, I dropped Hope and my contact information into the chat. So please feel free to reach out to us with any questions that you have. And I just want to thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you on September 22nd. We will be doing our last session of this at-home series, and we will be covering canning meats. So stay tuned, and it's going to be a good one. So thanks, everyone.